Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Well, let's get the view now. Look at the opinion pages of today's newspapers. And Sky's economics editor Ed Conway, in his column in The Times, tells voters they must make a choice: more austerity or new taxes. Ed says we are at a turning point as states look over the fiscal precipice. Rhiannon Lucy Coslett in The Guardian says it's time to ditch the shame and admit that she will vote for Jeremy Corbyn. She says it might be embarrassing, but in her view, it's the right thing to do. Fraser Nelson in The Telegraph says Theresa May needs to move discussion away from her personal virtues to those of the party she leads. And he also says the Conservatives need to tell voters about what he calls their record of success. Mrs May turns into her Home Secretary in Seamus Jennings' cartoon in The Telegraph, a comment on the Prime Minister's decision to send Amber Rudd to take her place in this week's television debate. And excuse me, Donald Trump is the subject of Peter Brooks' cartoon in The Times, talking about America's withdrawal from the Paris climate deal. The president is asking Uncle Sam, if renewables are so great, how about a second term? Well, joining me to go through those pages is Gavin McGaw, Director of Hanover Communications and previously head of the Conservative Party's Rapid Rebuttal Unit, and Zoe Williams, the Guardian columnist. And sorry for that sneeze there.
I think you've got an emotional response to the Paris Climate Accord.
Now, what about, I mean, Ed Conway and Fraser Nelson, in a sense, making conflicting points. Ed Conway saying the economy is in a pretty gloomy state and we're not being told that. Fraser Nelson saying actually employment's high, Britain's doing better than most other competitors.
I mean, he's funny. He's a funny commentator because everything according to him is always great. So it's always like, oh, you know, employment's at an all-time high, inequality's at an all-time low. He's very cherry-picky. He loves to go for the kind of... He always chooses a weird date and says we're at an all-time inequality low since 1992. You know, a kind of peak of the post-Thatcherite inequality. There are obviously serious systemic problems with the economy. Everybody has been in a serious systemic problem since the financial crash. I mean, you know, it's completely obvious. So I find it really frustrating having to listen to these people.
But what
say,
he doesn't like is the fact that that is not the Conservative campaign. The Conservatives are not campaigning on "you never had it so good." In fact, they are campaigning, some would say, moving on to Labour's territory, on their version of social justice for the just about managing.
I mean, Fraser's a very good columnist, but I think he gets this slightly wrong. At the heart of the Tory campaign is a really tight tension over Brand May and the long-term strategy of Number 10 and the short-term approach being run in an election campaign to win seats. And that tension's coming out, and there'll be books written on this subject in years to come. But at the heart of that tension is the positioning of May via the party, because the reason they went with Brand May to begin with was because she was polling much better than the party. Now, after some problems, of course it looks like we should be talking about the Conservative Party, but it's great with hindsight, isn't it?
I find it impossible to believe anybody will write or read a book about this period. It's so dispiriting and so small.
But do you feel though, you know, from your perspective, that the talk about the just about managing, clamping down on abuse by business and all of that is stealing some of Labour's clothes?
Look, it would be impossible not to talk about that. We've got kind of food bank use at an all-time high. We've got 60% of households in poverty are in work. We've got 45% of children are in poverty-stricken households. 45%. It's extraordinary. So to say the Conservatives should be going out on a ticket of "you've never had it so good, everything's brilliant," I think that would have been carnage. You know, impossible.
But what I do think, where Ed and Fraser agree in a certain extent, is that the deficit and the economy was not put at the heart of the message from the start. You know, if you look at George Osborne and David Cameron's technique, it was, you know, here's the deficit. The Tories in this campaign have said we're not going to pay deficit out until 2025. But in this last week, Zoe, they're going to be pushing this message about Jeremy Corbyn's magic money tree, etc. But it's too late because they didn't set it up on the deficit at the start, so the message won't get through.
I like your comms background there. There's a little bit of kind of strategy coming in. Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree. I think if you're going to, the lesson we learned, if anything, from Cameron's repeated successes was you have to, however unsophisticated the message is, you have to say it all the time.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, this is an economics column from Ed Conway, and to a certain extent Fraser, that's what he's interested in. But, you know, there's some people who say that actually the electorate's moved on. They know things are not great, but maybe not too terrible economically, and they want to talk about other things, identity, relationships with Europe, and that's where Mrs May is hitting the target.
Well, I think that there's definitely an element of truth in that, in the sense that we had 7 years of politics in which all that mattered was clearing the debt, and then they didn't clear the debt, and then when Hammond came in as part of the new regime, his immediate point was, OK, we've stopped trying to clear the debt, and everybody was like, oh, that was a complete MacGuffin, and that was just nothing.
But the problem with this whole campaign for the Tories has been that it was a proposition around strong and stable. It was not a message. And the messages that were meant to align with that should have been on deficit, on Brexit and all those things, but they got stuck that this was the message. And as a result, they can't do what Fraser wants them to do and what Ed wants them to do because they got stuck on one thing.
Now, what about what about that cartoon of Mrs May morphing into Amber Rudd? This whole question of the big television events. I mean, there's one this evening that she is, we think, going to turn up at on BBC Question Time.
The problem with, I mean, I really feel for Theresa May here because, you know, she used to be, the thing she used to be really good at was avoiding the question, and then somehow they've kind of, she's lost her Teflon.
But the whole strategy with Theresa May when she was Prime Minister from Downing Street before the campaign was use her when you have to use her, don't use her in a running commentary. During the campaign, they put her on the stumps, where she's speaking every day, and that's not her skill. And that's the problem. Now, Amber Rudd and David Davis have come through this campaign well, in the eyes of Number 10 and the campaign. But
so given that the pesky broadcasters have gone on and done the best they can in these circumstances, is it a good strategy, do you think, for her to sidestep as many as she can? No.
I think the problem is the strategy is being questioned because it was originally about leadership, and then they screwed up leadership by not getting on the front foot on social care with the manifesto, and it just will never make sense to me why that happened.
But also, I mean, I do think that Amber Rudd isn't performing well enough to be her stand-in. She's very robotic, and she seems to be trying to represent Theresa May in roboticism.
But she's a safe pair of hands.
Well, she's not, though, because there used to be a purpose to Amber Rudd, which she was quite warm, she was quite kind of straightforward, she was quite, you sort of believed that she was saying what she thought, whereas now she just looks like she's been programmed, she's a Maybot.
No, I mean, it does sound as if you're quite gloomy about the campaign. Are you gloomy about the outcome from a Conservative
I think the outcome will be around 40 to 50 seat majority for the Tories, which is good. It's what they set out to do. I think the campaign in hindsight will be looked back upon as a terrible campaign from a strategic perspective because they could have got more.
Yeah, I mean, it's the worst Conservative campaign I've ever seen in my life, and I didn't really rate Cameron's campaign. I thought it was ham-fisted, but this is, as I say, robotic, weak, incoherent, appalling.
Do you think it will have consequences in the ballot box?
I think it will have consequences in the ballot box. I would be surprised if they got as many as a 40-seat majority. I think if they get any less than that, it will look like a spurious and self-indulgent election, and I think it actually looks like that anyway.
I just think there's this tension between this short-termist electoral focus from people who've been brought in to run the campaign and those people who've been trying to shape Theresa May for years. And this week you will see her back to what she's been doing. And yesterday we saw it with the speech, more optimistic. That's Brand May. And that is moving away from this campaign. It's a pragmatic politician.
She's always been somebody who's quite grumpy and people don't mind.
But the language about Brexit has been more optimistic in the last 10 months than it's been during this campaign.
Well, we shall see. What is it? 6 days to go?
6 days.
Thank you both very much indeed.
I've been getting away with it all my